Good morning, everyone. This is Mortgage Pros 411. I'm Audrey Boissonou with my co-host Kevin Casey, and today we are joined by Steve Edrington.
And who the heck is Steve Edrington?
I used to be Steve Edrington's work wife, according to his wife, back in the day when he was doing a million flips and I was the go-to, which was really fun. And then he gave it all up for bigger and better things. He was also the former director of the East Bay Rental Housing Association. They've changed their name. Can never remember what the hell it is anymore. What is it, Steve? Now,
All right, I know you're breaking up there, so
I'm breaking up. Am I breaking up or are you
maybe
breaking
it
up?
was me.
Good
Yeah, I
Lord.
don't know.
God knows
I did pay for my internet connection. I did pay the bill, so it's
not
good.
surprising. Anyway,
It's always
so
helpful.
Steve is an interesting guy and he is multifaceted. Like he has in the past been the head, as I said, of the Rental Housing Association. He's advocated in Sacramento for the laws around landlord tenant and apartment owners and unit owners. He was an appraiser at one point. He's done, I don't know, 40, 50 flips in his life. He's done a ton of and he currently owns a company that focuses on ADUs and doing, he does a lot of expert testimony, expert witness work in court. So it's interesting talking to him. And we had lunch the other day. I've forgotten how interesting he was. No offense, Steve. And we had a great conversation about a million different things. And so anyway, so here he is. And so we're going to cover a bunch of things today. So buckle up,
Well,
kids.
well, thank you, Audrey. That's a nice introduction.
Is it? Oh, good. I'm glad because boy,
Thank
that
you.
could have gone either way, huh? Okay, so just a reminder, we are part of the Chrisman Media Group. Make sure you're checking out all of their offerings and supporting the people who sponsor them. Um, there are a few things I've been meaning to mention in the last few weeks. So I'm going to cover those first. Number one, I got a call from a client whose mortgage company had contacted him saying, your insurance company has a B rating, so you need to get a new insurance company or we're going to do it for you. We're going to put forced insurance in place. I'm like, oh, what? So
Wow. But
that
and don't tell me that insurance company was a fair plan.
it was not. It was
Woo!
well, okay, that's good and bad news. It means there are other companies out there that our clients are insured for with. And what's weird is I have another client who went with the same insurance company like a month ago or in the last month, and they didn't have an issue with their A paper lender. So I think it just depends on who's looking at what and when, but just be aware that these insurance companies are looking for reasons to cancel you, looking for reasons to not pay a claim. So on to my next little bit, which is they are looking at people who own their properties within a trust. Let's say you have a revocable family trust, right?
Uh-huh.
Let's say your insurance is not in the revocable family trust. It's Mr. and Mrs., Mr. and Mr., Mrs. and Mrs., whatever, right?
Really?
Yes. So, and I've heard this from a few different places, and a bunch of borrowers are calling and saying, can you please fix my insurance to reflect my trust? So, if you, as we are always looking for ways to help you reach out to your borrowers and have something to talk about, besides the fact that they have a 2.5% rate that they don't, probably don't want to mess with, there are some ideas. So make sure that their insurance companies are rated A, and make sure that if they're in a trust, that their insurance reflects this. And yeah, can you believe that?
Here, hold on. See what I'm just doing right now?
No, I can't see. No. Okay.
Put insurance into trust. It's a
Okay.
big post-it right on the screen.
There you go. All right. So, okay, so we have a comment from someone saying that the insurance has to be in the name, their insurance person told them that it has to be in the name of the individual. You can add the trust as an additional insured. Talk to your
Okay,
insurance
that makes sense.
people.
Yeah.
Talk to your insurance people. They're denying claims on this. So that's a good point, Tina. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. In addition to that, I have been having a little chat. Well, I was having a chat with the DRE Commissioner, Chica Sunquist, who is great.
Wait. Did she call you or did you call her? Just because that'd be a big difference on that chat.
Okay, she called me.
Oh, phew. Okay.
Um, okay. but she was returning my call because I had a question for her about something.
Yeah, I know you called her first.
Anyway, okay, bottom line is, you've heard all of this talk about how many LOs have dropped out of the business and everyone's going away and there's no LOs left and it's going to be this free for all for those of us who actually stuck with it and consider it to be an actual profession.
Wait, so yeah, I've heard numbers like 30% of the LOs are
Yeah,
gone.
I mean, we're hearing incredible numbers about how many LOs are no longer
And
doing.
I was not 100% believing that, only because like I have everybody's in our database and we're not losing 30% of our database. We've lost a chunk that they disappear. At the beginning of the year, like a whole bunch will drop off because they didn't renew their license or something, but not thousands.
Well, okay, so let's talk about this. Number one, just a reminder that NMLS actually releases their numbers once a year, typically like towards the end of Q1, I think, like March-ish. So once a year, you get actual numbers from NMLS, who is the keeper of all LO license information. Okay, so when you're getting an update in June, it's complete bupkis. All right. I was talking to Chica, who is with the Department of Real Estate. She's the commissioner. And somehow in the course of this conversation,
Wait, you're on a first name basis with the Department of Real Estate. Just want to make.
listen, let me just tell you something. We should get to know your regulators. They're really great. Not all of them, I'm sure, but the ones I've known, they are, I mean, she and I, oh God, we were laughing so hard. It was funny. And if you see a picture of her, she looks very serious and very professional, and she is, but she's also got this, she's really great. So bottom line is, this comes up in conversation, and she tells me that 26,000 people applied for license renewal in the state of California for the DRE. We have two entities. That is only 550 less than last year. I'm like, whoa, what? That was astounding, right? So then I'm thinking, okay, well, we have two regulatory entities in California. Maybe everyone's at the DFPI, not at the DRE. So Chica, God bless her, puts me in touch with the DFPI, who indicated the following. As of 12/31 of 2024, that would be December 31st, just in case you forgot, 31,684 people had, of eligible licensees had applied for renewal. As opposed to 12/31 of 2023, when 32,030 people had applied for renewal. The difference is 346 people. That's it. Out of
Wow.
tens and tens of thousands. So what they're saying is that there were less renewal requests, but a higher renewal rate compared to 2023. So the bottom line is, maybe people are dropping some of their multi-state licenses, like maybe they were licensed in a bunch of different places, and maybe they've dropped, some of those. It'll be really interesting to see when we see actual NMLS numbers, and also the DFPI pointed out that the late renewal is through February 28th. So there could be still some people who
Some people,
to apply.
some of those few hundred may still save their butts.
Yeah, exactly. But there does not seem to be some monster exodus as has been indicated. And I would like to also point out that oh God, I totally, you know what? I went to read a chat and then totally lost my train of thought. So forget that. Okay. Anyway, bottom line is just focus on yourself. Don't worry about everyone else. But I do think that you've really got to watch what you're seeing that's posted out there as the truth. Oh, this is a fact. Oh, it's often a bunch of baloney, as we often discuss on here. So there you go.
But no, I just read the headlines.
So we have been beating the drum for literally, okay, next month, we will have been doing this show for 5 years. 5. Bless you, Mr. Edrington. Bless you. So anyway, and we have been beating that drum for 5 years. Do not just read the headlines. You've got to go into the article. You have to read the whole thing. The writers of said articles are telling us that they write these articles. They actually have a lot of accurate information in it. And then the editors go in and tweak the headlines so that you have some headline that's going to, pique your interest, but it's not necessarily the truth. So the other day, Kevin says something about something he had read somewhere, and I started asking him questions, and he goes, I have no idea. I just read that headline. We were laughing. Anyway, so yeah, don't do that. That's not good. Okay. The last thing on my list before we dive into it with, well, okay, maybe not the last thing. And Steve, you can jump in anytime you have an opinion about any of these things. Steve, are you aware of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB? Do you know what that
Yeah,
is?
I do. Don't get me started.
Okay, okay, then shut up. Okay, so last week, I'm wondering if we had the last conversation with the CFPB ever on our show.
I
So
think we did.
what a difference a week makes, right? Oh my
Yeah,
God. So since then, they have shut down, well, we have a new director, Russell Voigt, is that how you say his last name?
I think
And
so.
he, his first act was to say, that's it, don't do anything, shutting the whole thing down, don't come to work, the building is locked. This morning in 30-something degree weather, you've got a bunch of picketers out in front, um, advocating for the value of the CFPB. And again, just a reminder, it's not just about mortgages, it's about payday lenders and and debt collectors and the credit bureaus and car loan people. And you know what I mean? Like it covers so many facets. So last week we had a great conversation about some of the things that could happen that might make the CFPB better. And certainly we have gone from it being that monster that we started with after the creation of Dodd-Frank and, you know, the people who were in charge at that point. I so badly wanted to say it and then say something not nice. Anyway, it was a disaster then, and they were very much, we were the enemy, they were the paternal figures, they were to look out for the consumer because we couldn't be trusted. It was a nightmare, right? And now we're swinging all the way to the other side, which is we don't need anything. We're good. Just let the states handle it. So it is very controversial, as it turns out. There are a lot of opinions around this. There are some people who think it should just be left to the states. There are folks who think that this is the biggest disaster ever. I feel like we've been heading in the right direction. We've had a very good open dialogue. We seem to be it gets better and better and more of a regulatory agency that we can communicate with, but also a pretty consistent message for the states in general as far as consumer protection goes, right? So at least it's a clear roadmap. If you're a compliance officer today, I would be calling my doctor and asking for an increase in my tranquilizer medication because can you imagine now instead of one, you know, a set of rules? I mean, I know there are 50 sets of rules, but for the big ones, yeah. Now you've got 50 different versions of everything potentially. And you know, we have two. We have DRE and DFPI, so you know, more than 50. But also
I think it's like 57 regulators. There's different territories,
yeah,
and there's 3 states with more than one regulator.
yeah,
California has 2, Texas 3, Utah 2, and then you get like Puerto Rico and Guam and
thank you.
So,
So
Audrey, I don't know if you saw the Wall Street Journal opinion section. They were couldn't beat that regulator couldn't be. They were cheering on its demise. So that was in the Wall Street Journal opinion section the other day.
again, it's not a function of whether it's good, perfect the way it was. It's is the idea of it at this point good, and should we, but what tweaks can be made or what can we change to make it better, not stop it entirely, because you've got these guys out there. Payday lenders are a great example of this. If you don't have somebody looking at them and saying don't do this, and frankly our business was the same, knowing that there's someone watching over you keeps some people in check. So there's some value to that. I thought that some of the comments in Rob Chrisman's commentary today were interesting. So he wrote, one industry vet wrote me saying, as much as we all complain about the regulation through enforcement, at least there was an adult in the room telling us to eat our vegetables. And another comment was, I have seen this movie before. The popcorn's great, but the ending sucks. So it's going to be, who knows how this is.
I mean, so we heard that the Elon Musk team kind of came through the CFPB, and the description was like Nazis storming a building, and I was kind of like, you know, turnabout's kind of fair play, because that's what they were doing to us.
But that wasn't good, and neither is this. There
No,
is
it's not.
the middle, which I think if you ever listen to our show, we talk about, I mean, we're usually dancing somewhere in the middle of things because that's where a lot of common sense resides, is in the middle. It's not on the extremes. And so, yes, they did do that to us. And yes, it sucked, but we've come a long way since there. And do we want to go backwards to, before, when we had all of these crazy people who were doing all this egregious activity and really harming consumers? So where's the balance, people? That's what I'm looking for.
Well, Audrey, I think one of the big complaints that people felt like should have been in the Department of Treasury as a department, and it was part of the Federal Reserve, and they had their own funding source, and Congress couldn't touch their funding source.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's the issue.
Yes.
Maybe
Yes.
maybe people aren't against, we're against bad players, ripping people off. But I think maybe it was just where in the hierarchy and
Yes.
who they reported to was probably more the issue here.
Right. Well, and when you found out that when they canceled the next refunding in April, and you find out they have 700 and something million dollars in reserves, the CFPB, I'm like, all right, that's valuable.
Well,
Look at that.
a whole bunch of money that we can use for other purposes.
Well, okay, but but again, like the idea that you just completely, I agree that changes can and should be made. And we talked about that last week.
Yeah.
It is valid. And I want them to, trust me, because the idea that you can't work with your regulator and without them thinking that you have some ulterior motive, you're trying to skirt around the rules, which is not the intent. Most of us just want to be compliant. Tell us how to do that. And it's just like I talked about this last week. It's like when you have a rep and you can call them and talk through a loan and get the answers, because every loan is so nuanced and different. And so having a conversation is really helpful. If you're working with a lender and they send you a job aid to read, and that's supposed to tell you what to do with your loan, that is useless. It's totally useless. I mean, it gives you the basis, but it doesn't give you all the details you probably need. So again, there are changes that can and should be made, no doubt. And would I like to see them spend less money on themselves? Probably. I mean, there's we could
they were making some serious coin working for the CFPB.
Okay, first of all, they're not making tons of money working for the CFPB. I mean,
Oh,
nobody's
yeah.
getting,
They almost
Maybe-
only hired attorneys. So you tell me what an attorney wants to make.
they make less money when they work in these positions. That's the whole point, Kevin, is that these
Mhm.
positions, they used to, not now so much, job security. And but anyway, bottom line is it's going to be really interesting to see this play itself out. But just remember that the state regulatory agencies step in when the federal government steps back. And it's not necessarily better. Sometimes it's worse. And again, consistency is not a terrible thing, especially in places where they don't believe in any consumer protection at all. So, we just have to think through this.
Yep.
You know
No,
what
I can see it, because you're going to have two big states are going to step in: New York and California.
What?
New York and California can be the two big regulatory states that are stepping in to fill the void. So be careful what you ask for.
Well, we also have Washington. There's a bunch of states that are on
Yeah,
board.
yeah,
with all that.
Washington stuff too. So
Yeah.
So
there's-
Audrey, I would say to your listeners, I spent 8 years as a lobbyist, a local lobbyist. Bureaucrats and elected officials they need to look to industry professionals to give them common sense guidance.
yes.
And I think writing your bureaucrat, your legislator, and saying or communicating with them, hey, this is a common sense way of regulating this, and
Yeah.
not, do 3 backflips and 1 forward dive off the diving board, craziness. So
Yep.
I think a lot of times regular bureaucrats just don't know. I mean, I've dealt with city councils and they're nice people, but they have a degree in early education, child psychology or something, and they have no idea of how it works, and they only hear their constituents tell them things. A lot of times I've looked that they need nuts and bolts people that do it every day to go, okay, here's how we get it done, right?
Yeah.
And accomplish their end goal. And I tell people, do you want compliance, or do you just want a bunch of scofflaws? If you go down that path, you're gonna make it so difficult that nobody will ever figure it out, versus, something that's common sense and people that can actually, it's easy to comply with. So I would say to your listeners, talk to your regulators or city council, federal people, whatever, and give them feedback. A lot of times they're looking for feedback, and have an open comment period. and
And
give it on like a new form, right? I've dealt with city councils on forms. Oakland said, we want a smoking ordinance. So you already require a form, add it to the existing form, put a checkbox, right? Oh, that makes sense. Things like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a good time for you to remember that there are organizations like the California Association of Mortgage Professionals and National Association of Mortgage Professionals and MBA that are in there advocating their, like, so be part of that voice too. It is
Yeah.
what for us to engage. We have a comment here from Brandon. He said, how no one saw that, well, okay. I'll modify his thing a little bit. How did no one see this was coming? I was waiting for a juicy show last week and everyone was like, nothing is going to change, really? And I'm like, okay, so just to be clear, we are walking a very tightrope last week. It was, the whole thing was a little precarious. So we were, and also they're not allowed to project on what is happening or to comment on that. So we were trying to get some information as much as we could, and the fact that he was here was a miracle. And again, I mean, was that the last time we hear from the CFPB publicly? We'll see. So
I think so, although we may be able to play that recording.
well, yeah, we'll see. So anyway, so somebody said, please tell us what they have done to help the consumers except for being on your show. Nothing for mortgage borrowers. And that's not necessarily the case. They've actually clawed back billions of dollars in refunds for borrowers and people,
I got one
consumers.
of
And
those
they,
refunds.
pardon me?
I got one of those refunds. My loan was taken up by was it Aquin Mortgage, and they started charging me for electronically paying my mortgage, and
Yeah.
it was like $35, and so the CFPB fined them for that and made them pay back all the borrowers, and I got a check for $17.
Well, junk fees.
Yeah, do the math.
Junk fees.
They can't even get a credit report for
I
that.
paid probably, I did that maybe 10 times, so 350 times, or 350 bucks I would have paid, and I got a check for $17. So
Okay, so in my dreams, we have a regulator that you can have a conversation with and talk about real things and they listen. I felt like we were headed that direction, especially with folks like Mark working there. And so again, I understand the frustration. I do. I really do. And also there's another conversation separately going on about NMLS and that's not going anywhere that we can see either. It's just and they're not a regulator. They're literally the keeper of licenses. It's a registration. It's not even a licensing agency. So a lot would have to happen to make all of that go away. And again, do we want it to? Do you want people to do terrible crap here and then go there and do more terrible crap and have no connection? So again, think about it. Yeah, again, I don't claim to have the answers. I have a lot of questions. I have a lot of concerns. And so anyway, yeah, interesting out there. Holy moly.
but yeah, we have a special guest today. We've only gone 25 minutes about
Hey,
talking about it.
he's been talking. He's told us his opinions about the CFPB, and I happen to know, I can, just from listening to, I know him well enough to know exactly what he's thinking. So like any good work wife would. So we also have Jerome Powell speaking to Congress today and tomorrow, his prepared remarks. He's, beating the same drum beat. We've made significant progress. He gets a 24-hour peek at inflation numbers. So we know that he's seen the CPI numbers for tomorrow, and he's sounding pretty confident as in his testimony. So it will be very interesting to see them tomorrow. We expect them to be better. We're replacing a higher number from last year. We think the number will be better this year if the shelter numbers are catching up at all. We are onto something. And then tomorrow we also have a 10-year auction. Thursday we have PPI and a 30-year bond auction. And then Friday we have retail sales. So could be an interesting week. Definitely could be an interesting week. So with all that being said, Mr. Edrington, let's start with, because you have a lot of information about a number of different things. So let's start with ADUs. We know that you're in California, but we also know that ADUs are happening across the country. Are you feeling like the laws are fairly similar from state to state? What are your thoughts on all that?
Sure, let me give everybody a background. So I've been a licensee since '92, and I started my career as a real estate appraiser, been a broker, multifamily, and but just been a real estate investor and professional for a long time. In 2020, the state law changed in California to allow accessory dwelling units in multifamily. California had ADUs on the law since the 1980s. State of Washington, state of Oregon has a version of it as well. But we looked at multifamilies, and end of the day, I think most ADUs are going to be built by multifamily owners, apartment owners. We looked at it because what is an ADU? There's a lot of misnomers around it. An ADU is just a zoning overlay. So just to give you an example, state of California, basically when you pull a building permit at your local jurisdiction, they're following state law with a little bit of local overlay. So when that building inspector, they're using an International Code Council certified building inspector, that's who's coming and they sign off on your building, electrical, plumbing, and mechanical. That's generally how it works. Your locals do zoning. So your local jurisdiction, how high the building can be, setback, parking, open space, and maybe in some jurisdictions, what color you can paint the building, right? That's zoning.
That's crazy.
The state of California is trying to do is we have a housing shortage. Half of all the lack of housing in the United States is sitting in California. And what the state has done to locals is said, if you can build an accessory unit to your primary dwelling, if you meet these standards. So if you walk into, we'll pick San Francisco. If you walk into the city of San Francisco and you say, hey, I'd like to build a secondary unit in the backyard of my house, and you meet this checkoff list that the state has provided, San Francisco within 60 days has to approve your unit. The neighbors can't complain. They can't send you to planning. It can't get appealed to the city council. If you meet the checkoff within 60 days, the planning side that handles zoning has to say yes. Now you go over to building, and that's where usually the problems and the costs start. But the other thing that it says that they can't charge you impact fees. If it's 749 square feet or less, they can't charge you impact fees. And if it's over that, it's proportional. They're also saying that, you don't need a separate water meter. You don't need sprinklers. That's a huge cost. So you don't have to meet all the current building codes. So it's what we call a ministerial process for the city. Why did we get involved into it? Because we had clients that had a fourplex with a legal unit down in the basement. They'd go to their local jurisdiction. The city say, hey, your building zoned as a fourplex, and you need to provide a fifth parking spot. So we're going to kill you on it's a fourplex, and we're going to kill your project because there's no parking. Now the state law says we don't care what the zoning is. If it's a fourplex zoning and you have a fifth unit, if you meet the ADU law, you get it. We don't care about parking. If you're within a half-mile of a bus stop, we don't care. No parking required. So it's ways to allow people to add units. We looked at it because there's tens of thousands of illegal units or unpermitted, or I love the agent's word. It's an unwarranted unit. I'm like, no, it's unpermitted. I always push back. Along with the crystal clear pool and the lush green lawn and the unwarranted unit, it's a great house, right? So I always chuckle at that, but it's unpermitted. So anyway, there's tons of unpermitted units. I guess Audrey and I are kind of going back the other day. How can mortgage professionals help their clients? So the question is, can you help them find money to legalize? So I have two companies, Edrington Associates. I'm a real estate broker. We do a lot of expert witness around landlord, tenant, HOA, broker, agent standard of care. And then my other company, Adapt Dwellings, we help clients add and legalize units through the ADU process. A lot of our clients are multifamily clients. They come to us. Code enforcement came out and cited us the other day because my tenant was mad at me even though they didn't pay rent. And they gave me this thing called a notice of violation. It says within 60 days, you must submit permits and you must finalize this. And there's a lot of issues around rentals and illegal units or unpermitted units. So if you knowingly rent somebody an unpermitted unit, they can say, hey, you fraudulently rented me a unit and my contract's invalid. It usually runs down to the problems happen when, Johnny didn't pay rent. They go get legal aid, they realize they're in an unpermitted unit, and then it kind of all heck breaks loose, right?
Yeah.
Give me all the rent back.
That's not, is that exclusive to San Francisco or is that?
No, it's all over California. We're seeing that.
Okay. I know,
So
but
generally what
I don't know
happens,
about other
I went,
states.
hey, Kevin, you rented me an apartment. You told me it was legal. Now I found out it wasn't legal. Hey, I want all my rent back. Oh, by the way, and a lot of unpermitted units have problems. The window's leaking, the heater doesn't work,
Yeah, yeah.
all this sort of stuff. And I think the unit's so bad, I'm going to move out. And then I'm in a rent controlled jurisdiction. I'm paying you at $1,000 a month. And, it was really worth $2,000 a month. And I want the rent differential because I was going to live there for the next 20 years. And so that's where things get crazy. A lot of jurisdictions have trouble damages and attorney's fees. And Audrey wanted me to talk about a case we actually went to trial on in San Francisco. Guy bought a duplex in San Francisco with a third ground floor unit that was unpermitted. And the agents, good for them, clearly told the buyer it's an unwarranted unit. So they couldn't go back on the agent. Well, this person had been there probably 10 plus years in this unpermitted unit. He goes in, starts trying to raise rents. I always a red flag on a ground floor unit because when you open the door, you step down into this unit. And guess what? They had a huge rainstorm and it flooded out. And the tenant came to the landlord and said, hey, will you pay me a relocation fee? And he said, well, how about if I buy you out? And she said, no. And it went back and forth, and nothing happened. So she continued to stay out. She sued him for wrongful eviction. In San Francisco, the jury awarded the tenant $285,000. And we think that's a lot of money, but it was trebled, meaning 3 times, and attorney's fees. The final judgment was $1.2 million.
Yeah.
The interest on that, statutory interest, was 10 grand a month.
Oh my God. Okay, so let's just stop for a second because let's talk this whole idea of this unpermitted.
Illegal, unwarranted, whatever you want to call it. Sure.
Okay, so let's start with what do you want to call it? What is it called?
I call it unpermitted because you haven't gone through the correct permitting process.
I thought I said unpermitted. I said unwarranted. Oh God.
Oh,
Okay.
you said unpermitted.
Part of
That's
the.
with you.
You did say unpermitted.
Okay, so the units that were built without permits, and this is happening all over the place, and people think it's a free for all. The other problem is this has been happening forever. So you can have an unpermitted unit or an unpermitted something that was built in the 70s or put together in the 70s, and today now 500 years later now it's a problem. So what do we do with this? And I've done some poking as far as the investors. So we've always operated under if it was done in a workmanlike manner, then it was fine, right? But we're starting to see a little bit of pushback on some of that where like some of the
Yeah,
lenders
we have a lender now that won't accept it.
allow you can have it in your unit, but they're not going to allow any value for it, that kind of thing. So there's some changes that are happening right now. And then to your point, Steve, where you've got code enforcement knocking on your door going, hey, we hear there's a violation. And then or God help you, you're filed, you have a tenant who sues the crap out of you, and all of a sudden, I mean, who pays the
or a neighbor you pissed off because you parked in front of their house, and suddenly they call the permit department.
Steve, who pays that $1.2 million? Let's assume the home buyer doesn't have it. Who pays it?
Well, what happens, it turns into an abstract judgment, and then it gets recorded in the county that you live in, and then they can garnish your wages, clean out your bank account, go to your business with the sheriff, open the till box, and then they can force a sheriff sale on your house. So those are some of the things that can happen.
But hopefully you have insurance that'll cover it.
Well, here's the problem. If you read in your policy, it's under personal injury, wrongful eviction. Hopefully they'll pay, but they usually won't pay trouble damages, and they won't pay the attorney's fees. So they'll pay the $285, but they won't do the 3X, and they won't do the attorney's fees. So generally on those sort of things, the landlord or whoever's being insured will probably hire a personal counsel and fight back.
So again, this is like when you're looking for something to talk to your borrowers about, here's a good subject, especially, anyone, there's so many people who think, oh, I just, convert my garage, or I am going to do this man shed or whatever they call them in the backyard, and I'm going to turn that into one. There's so much hair on this that it's fine if you understand all of it, if you're following all the rules, but if you don't, you are in some trouble. Okay, so tell us what we do. What do we
Yeah, so basically, what is the standard of care? What is your responsibility? Your responsibility is to provide a lawful unit to anybody you rent to. That is the bottom line. So why do we have building codes? The whole concept of building codes is so we don't have slums, substandard, unsafe housing. So when you look at the building code is the minimum standard. You can go above it, right? And you should, but the building code is the minimum standard. So what is code? So you have your building department that does planning, zoning, all that stuff. What is code enforcement? They're really the building code police department is really what they are. And some cities are sitting in the building department, and some cities are actually sitting in the police department. And they can hit you for shopping carts, dead cars, graffiti, trash, all sorts of stuff is all code enforcement, right? But they also building codes. So when you build a unit that you didn't go through the process of going to your local jurisdiction and getting permission to build a unit, pulling permits. So, they come out and they inspect the foundation and they do a rough inspection and they do, the framing, electrical, plumbing rough, and they do finals and stuff. That's all a public safety function that you've built this structure to minimum standards. That's really what it is. And when you skip the whole step and say, I'm just going to convert the garage, we don't care that the floor leaks when it rains. You skip the process. And so what the city is saying when they come out and give you a notice of violation is, we haven't inspected it. It's illegal, and we're going to deem it unsafe because it hasn't gone through an inspection process. So what happens is when you build a unit or a house or whatever, you have to go through this inspection process so that the city can confirm that you met minimum standards. That's really what it's about. And when you skip it, they're going to say it's unsafe by default. Although we've seen some illegal units we saw one in Berkeley, it was gorgeous. Like, they did it perfectly. It was a zoning issue, and the reason why they couldn't get it legal, the fire department said no because it was a cul-de-sac and it was 1 foot short, and they said it didn't meet the minimum standards for the fire truck to come in and turn around, right? And they said, no, you can't have it. So, but it was beautiful. It was like one of the most beautiful units we've seen out there. But generally, unpermitted units come with a whole host of problems historically. They leak. There's no heat. Toilet doesn't flush correctly, right? The wiring's crazy, right? So those are sort of things. So what we have to do is have a proper certificate of occupancy, proper permitting process. That's what's required. Every unit needs to be properly permitted, gone through the steps, and final. Cities don't always issue certificates of occupancy, but if you have a permit card, it says, build unit A in the garage or convert garage into a unit, and it's all filled out and final, then that works as a certificate of occupancy. So that's what's needed. You need to meet the minimum building standard.
Okay, so they knock on your door, it's already there, it's already done. What is
They don't knock on your door. They put a
whatever,
notice on your garage door with blue tape. That's how they do it.
fine.
Kevin, sounds like Kevin's been there and done that, right?
Yes, he has recently. Okay, so with all that being said,
And I just saw someone doing it the other day to someone else. I was like, oh, I feel sorry for that.
Sounds like fun.
he called the county on you, Kevin. He was having a bad day.
Yeah, that's Dirk. He did it.
Yep. So anyway, okay, so again, you get a notice somehow, some way. What do you do next? What happens?
Don't ignore it. That's what I was saying.
Yeah, don't ignore it. They're pretty cool though, once you call.
Well, here's the deal. What I found with code enforcement: if you're chasing them, they're cool. If they're chasing you, they're not cool.
Yeah.
Good to know. So then you chase them and you contact them and say, "Hey, I have this situation. How do I fix it?" Is that what you do?
Yeah, you get a notice of violation. Usually they're pretty clear, but what I would suggest that you do is call a code enforcement officer and, hey, Bob, it's Steve. I got this notice. I want to let you know we're going to, this is what we're going to do to repair it or do it. And if it's a illegal unit, we've hired a company like Adapt Dwellings, my company. We're going to submit plans to the city and we're going to legalize it. And I'll keep you on notice. And I think code enforcement appreciates if you acknowledge that they come out and done it and that you have a plan.
Yep.
If you have a
And-
plan
okay.
and you're communicating, they will withhold fines, but they can fine you up to $1,000 or $2,000 a day for non-compliance.
Yeah.
Well,
Once you start working with them, they're fairly cool.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
been my experience. That they may be a little gruff or lack personality, and that's fine. But I don't. Most building inspectors tend not to have a glorious sales personality or whatever. But that's okay. I don't care. I can log.
Well, they get the job.
Yeah, and so the point is, if you're communicating with them, you hire a company like us to help you navigate it. They tend to leave you alone and give you time.
Okay, so I know you can't give us exact, but give us a ballpark of like what does it cost? And then do they reassess your property and the tax?
Yes.
And tell us about that.
So generally the city, I'll pick San Francisco, Department of Building Inspection, will require you to submit a set of plans to them. So the plans and in the application process, so there two things are happening. One, an as-built. What do you have there now? Well, I have an illegally converted garage. What do you plan to build there? So and then want a site plan and all the other stuff. So when you submit them the documents and plan checks looking at it, okay, what do you have? Well, this is what we have. Now, in our company, we send out a professional laser measure the building, right? So we have an exact set what that building is, where the posts are, where the walls are, where all that sort of stuff. So it's exact. And we show them proposed. Now, in the proposed drawings, we're meeting all the building code standards, and we'll say, meeting this standard, and everything is sized. Water, electrical, plumbing, everything is sized. And you have to meet Title 24 energy calcs. Do we have the right enough windows and lights? And then so remember when the building code, everything's sized. So you have to show that the unit that you're going to create or fix meets all the applicable building codes. And there's a permitting process. Here's the crazy thing about San Francisco. If you get caught with an illegal ADU or illegal unit, they will force you to legalize it. They will force you to spend money, and you have to go through a hardship process to get out of it. They will not let you go. You can't go in generally and pull, oh, you know what? I want to be a garage now. Screw this, kick the tenant out and boo back. No. Their public policy is to save all housing. So that's a problem in San Francisco. Other cities are a little less stringent, but that is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really difficult to get rid of a unit in San Francisco. So like if you have a 5-unit building, you want to convert it to a 4, you get better financing. That could be a problem in San Francisco. But
Right.
San
And then
Francisco is very unique.
and I can't think of the state law. The state law tells all cities in California you can't remove units. So if you have a unit, you can't remove it. So you can't take your duplex and go down to a house.
Yeah.
That's a state law. Senate bill something, and I can't remember. It just passed the last couple of years.
Yeah. Fortunately, the rest of the country isn't as strict.
That
Right.
thinks that some mealy mouth, who cares what they're doing? Think of another example in another city. Like, is it that egregious everywhere or that difficult everywhere? I mean, you just said that's a state law. But
New York is pretty tough.
Yeah, I was in Houston, and Houston doesn't. I asked them, "Are you using the international?" They said, "We use the International Building Code." California uses the version. California has to make it more restrictive than.
Yeah.
Because International Code Council has what we call a model set that states can adopt, and Texas adopts the model set, and they were like, "We don't adopt because it changes every 3 years." They said, "We're using a 10-year-old version," and that's what they do. The last time I talked to them. So California being California adopts the ICC building code every 3 years and then adds on to theirs, and everybody adds on. I mean, we talk bureaucracy, it costs money to be in compliance, right? Now, some things are pretty good. Fire, seismic, all these sort of things that, probably should seismic upgrade your house. It's probably a good idea, right?
Yeah.
It's probably, if you're in a high fire area, you should, do all stucco and no, wood overhang, right? I think those are good ideas, but some things you look at the code and you go, really? Why are we doing this?
right.
It is what it is. I would say back to your audience, how do you help them?
Yep.
There are plenty of in single family homes. There seems to be plenty of money out there for what we call construction to perm loans, right? Where it's just one loan, it's not a construction loan, and then a
Right,
finance.
right.
But I would say if you're buying 5+ unit deals out there, you can help your clients. I would go through, the local jurisdiction has a final say what's in that building. I wouldn't be afraid to buy units buy buildings with unpermitted units. You can add value. I think as a mortgage professional, you can get them a construction loan, you get them a bridge loan or something, go in, hire a company like us. We can get them through the city, get it permitted, and then be able to count all that income and, to the debt coverage service ratio, right? I think you can add a lot of value by legalizing units, adding units, helping your clients, so I don't illegal when they say illegal units, I just smile because we know how to fix them and it's not the end of the world. Now there's some things that are just really expensive to fix,
Right.
but
That's the issue. I think the biggest issue is, okay, partly time, but mostly money. Like a lot of people don't have the funds that are needed to make this kind of change.
absolutely.
And that's the difficult part. And that's the part that, you can't ignore that. It's an issue. They can't afford, or they don't qualify for one of these loans. They don't have the means to do it. So we have some pretty funny, we have somebody who commented that Texas has building codes, LOL.
They do. They actually, and I know Houston being like no zoning, they actually have most states follow the ICC or International Code Council model code book, right? Model codes. They do, and Texas does follow an older version of it, but they do follow something.
Right. We have a question saying, can you speak to the situation in Florida? And I don't know, in my mind, I feel like there are so many situations in Florida.
Well,
Okay.
well, I think that the difference between Florida and California, we tend to do seismic, right? They tend to do wind.
Yeah.
So if you have a building, you need that building to withstand 150 mile an hour, 200 mile an hour wind. And if you notice, they'll have like hurricane clips on the eaves, so the wind doesn't grab the eave and rip the roof off like a sardine can, right? So
Yeah.
Okay.
is it structurally when the winds blow, will your house collapse, right? So I think that's a different
I
thing.
stayed at
in
stayed in a
California.
hotel in Florida, and they had a steel I-beam down the middle of the sliding glass door, and I was like, well, that's impressive.
Well, yeah, I mean, the point is, and I think when we think of natural disasters, and I was in New Orleans, right, down in the
Yep.
9th Ward, you know what? You have this huge structure, and at 10 feet, the house gets built above it. You know what they're doing? They're building out of the floodplain,
Yeah.
right? So as we have natural disasters and think fires or seismic, the building codes change, right? To withstand these natural disasters. I think you'll see that. I think FEMA got tired of paying a lot of money over and over for people to build enough. So whether it's hurricanes, flood zones, seismic fire, those are all really addressed in the building.
We have an area in the
Why
Bay
we have
Area.
building codes.
Yeah, we have an area in the Bay Area here that gets flooded pretty regularly, like at least once every 10 years. And now when you go there, all the houses are all up.
Right. And that's why we have, and that is every time there's a disaster, ICC looks, okay, what things do we need to change in the code? What sort of problems? And they're probably made up of fire officials and building code professionals, or that's who's making the numbers.
Yeah. Now, speaking of insurance,
is talking about everyone putting RVs in their backyard for Airbnbs. Although I think I made the joke, I was joking that everyone should put an RV in their front yard before they build, or wherever they're planning to put an ADU before they do it. Rent that out, see if you can stand having your tenants 20 feet from your front door. And so it is. So anyway, I didn't know they were actually doing that in Florida. That's that's funny unless it's next door to you, I guess. And okay, so let's talk about, we've talked about unpermitted additions. Let's just talk about your house. Like you've moved things around within the footprint of your house and you don't have tenants involved. I mean, is it a little less terrible in that regard?
Well, you look at most cities. I live in Oakland. My office is in Oakland. Oakland has on their website, there's like 7 things that you can do. Build a 7-foot high fence, paint carpet, change the P-trap underneath the sink. And that's about it, right? If you break the sheetrock, do something, you got to pull a permit, basically. Yeah, I mean, we're in the Bay Area. We love regulation. And as I tell people that work for me, I said, you know what? If the city was competent and well organized and really efficient, they wouldn't need us, right? So we exist because of their incompetence. But
Well,
I've
San
been
Francisco, if you replace a tile in your shower, you got to pull a permit.
How hard, okay, we have a question here from someone who I know is very, very smart. She says, how hard is it to cure permits post remodel of a house? Potential cost.
I've done it. You need to work with your building department. We've submitted plenty of plans and legalized a lot of things.
Yeah,
So,
it's not, they'll work with you.
yeah, and as a design professionals, I have an architect and a building inspector that work for me. We will work with you. We can, get you through the city. We know the people at the city in these different departments in our area.
You might have to rip the
Definitely work.
sheetrock off and show what the exposed construction underneath it. That's probably your worst situation.
Yeah, in the worst situation. But I've legalized additions that come in and they wrote me a notice of correction and we fixed everything,
Yeah, I think the biggest one is maybe height restrictions. Sometimes people do stuff. So I'm in the middle of, was helping a client. They were thinking about buying this property that Audrey knows, I call it the crazy house. Was built before the big earthquake in '06 in San Francisco. And they had pulled permits, but then they didn't close the permit. And there was all this, mixed messages of what the work was done, what work wasn't done, and what was going to need to do to cure the permit. And then I was like, my initial expenses, I was looking at, maybe I should pick this thing up for a couple $100,000, to do the work. You would gain about $600,000 in appreciation. I'm like, that might be worthwhile. But then I started digging around a little bit. And I go, this ain't $200,000 worth of work. This is more like $1 million worth of work, and it's not going to pan out when you do the pencil it all out.
Yeah, crazy.
I'll give you an example. We worked for a big apartment, one of the largest apartment owners in San Francisco. They bought a property in Oakland, and the building went back to the 20s. And when the city said there was 52 doors, when you physically counted the doors, there was 53. What happened in the 30s, there was a per door tax, and the on-site manager, they left that out. So on the records, it showed 52 units since like the 40s coming forward. We went back in time and proved to the city that actually 53 units. And we helped the client legally grab another unit by just fighting with them on the paperwork. Now, code enforcement's position was no. Get out of here, right? We don't want to talk to you. But we submitted a huge report, and they finally said, we had them up on appeal. We were going to sue them. The client's going to sue them. We knew we were right. And the city finally relented and said, no, you're right. The paperwork's right. We'll rewrite the certificate of occupancy to show 53 units. And that was like an on-site manager unit that they had skipped. So, we do a lot of paperwork, cleanup, stuff like that. I mean, I have a bill.
You give us
For me, we sort of like that crazy stuff for some reason.
Well, yeah. Can you give us some idea of what it costs to bring you into the mix? And I know it depends, but an idea?
Yeah, to get a full set of plans generally runs 10 to 20 grand, depending on how complicated it is. And people are like, well, I just got to do this. We have to document it. And that's the problem. It's all the documentation with the city. Is generally, we'll start off a lot of times with a feasibility report. People call us and then, well, I want to legalize this. And we go out there and there's just lots of weird legs on it. And sometimes we will say, unless you want to dig down the basement or raise the house, it's not going to happen. But we try to help clients. So we'll do a lot of feasibility reports. And my thing to the client is, if it's a no, I'd rather have you get that no on the front end. Sometimes it's very straightforward. And we're like, no, you didn't need the feasibility report. It's just basic. Kind of areas that we see, they want to convert a shed and it was never properly permitted. And you have to be away the property line 4 feet. We looked at one in Berkeley. It was clearly a shed, never permitted, and it was like 1.5 feet from the property line. We're like, you know what, that's a no. It was so screwed up. We're like,
Right.
tear it down and start over. You don't need to spend any more money on it. You know, those are the sort of things that I'm trying to help the client walk through and make good financial decisions.
Yeah, may I just state is, I think where your specialty and where your niche is really is where it's like an apartment building, and then they want to add like 2 other units. So you've got like a 8-unit building, and they want to add 2 more, like either in the garage space or in the backyard. Or am I correct?
Yeah, we're really good at that. Actually, we went back and looked at all 2/3 of what we deal with are unpermitted units.
Right.
You know, and so they've had this unit down. We working on a building in Oakland. It was permitted as a community space. And I think what happened was the zoning, they couldn't provide the extra parking space. It was like a 16 unit building. They just didn't have the 17th parking spot. So zoning shut them down and so you get a max of 16 units. And they had this extra space and they quote community room. Well, it was never a community room. It was an apartment building, an apartment unit that was just unpermitted. So we went back through the ADU law and we were able to permit it because we don't need the parking spot.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
I mean, yeah, and just the client was like, well, it finally turned over. I think it's time. Let's get it legal.
Hey, Audrey, we were talking yesterday about the insurance on unpermitted areas, and we learned something really interesting there, and that was that from insurance point of view, they don't care whether it's permitted or not permitted. All they care, did you pay the premium for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath? Even though it was only legally a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, we'll pay the loss on the 3-bedroom, 2-bath as long as you paid for the premium in the most cases. Now, I'm also learning that insurance are now doing interior inspections on properties when they were only doing like drive-bys or, photos and stuff like that. And what they're looking for on those, they're not looking to see how clean you keep your house. They're looking to see, the biggest one they're looking for is your circuit breakers, because there's a couple circuit breaker companies that were out there back in the 70s and 80s that they made things out of aluminum, which is not a good idea in the circuit breaker box. And those are prone to fire. And so insurance companies don't want to insure those. And if they do, they want them replaced. And replacing a circuit breaker is a challenge because a lot of them are put in closets, which now is illegal. Am I right, Steve?
Yeah, you can't have a
Can't have a circuit breaker in a closet.
Sparks, actually. It sparks, and then people push up the clothes against it, and they pack their closet, and you have these sparks coming out of the sub panel. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the clothes catch on fire and the whole house on fire. So, if the circuit breaker is like in the garage or something, it's real simple. You just switch out the circuit breaker, unconnect some wires, put in the new circuit breaker, reconnect the wires, and you're good to go. Not a huge task. But if you have to relocate a circuit breaker, that is an expensive project because you have to rewire all those wires that came to that circuit breaker, and that can be a super challenge.
Actually, I've done quite a few of them. Basically, that sub panel sitting in your closet, we can make it a junction box and then move all the wires, pull it over to another spot, and it'll go back to there, and we'll just have to put a junction plate on it. And and then rewire it.
That's not so bad then. Okay.
Yeah, generally the issues are, hey, I want to build an ADU. Okay, how old is your house? Well, it's 1930s. I have a 220 60 amps.
Yeah.
And I want to and everything when you run all the load calc, you got to add more power. And plus PG&E will require you to have a separate meter in our jurisdiction.
Yeah.
They use a thing called the Green Book, and you got to comply with the Green Book. Yeah, so
I went through that one myself.
Power to your site, and if they've underground it, like on my house, I have a house built 59 in the 80s. They underground it and they just put the cable in the dirt and they didn't put it in conduit. And so when I want to upgrade, I had to dig back to the service box and to put conduit in the ground. And I said, well, how much power will you give me? And they said like 350 amps. I said, I'll put a 400 amp service in. If I got to dig it all the way back to the street box, then I'll just put a bigger pipe in. And the incremental cost is not that much, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, now I have like 400 amp service on my house, which is more than what I need, but I guess I can buy my third Tesla and charge everything, right?
Yeah. Plus you've got all those eggs on your balcony, so you got to power that stuff, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So, Steve, how do they reach you if they want?
Yeah, let me put my information in the chat.
They're not going to see it. Okay. So if you want Steve's information, email me at audrey@mortgagepros411.com. I'll
Yeah.
send you his contact information.
We can put it in the YouTube video also.
Yes, and we do have a YouTube channel. It is up to date. It does not have this last week's show on it, and it won't, but it is up to date other than that. So YouTube Mortgage Pros 411 will embed it in there. And
At adaptdwellings.com, you can see me, just Google adaptdwellings.com. You can find me there, and I put my email in the chat.
okay, Steve at edringtonsassociates.com. That's his email address. So we have some thank yous coming in, and just for fun, the QCEW report is coming out because we didn't even get to the BLS jobs report that came out last Friday. So QCEW, which is the roll numbers, will be out on the 19th. So I'm kind of excited about that. We'll have that to look forward to. And there are loans happening, there are locks, but let me tell you, people, when you ask folks who are busy what they're doing, it is not all conventional. So make sure that you are branching out, do some of the things that we talk about every single week, so that your business continues to grow this year, because it can. And, go to your clients, give them the information that you learned from Steve today, talk to them about the insurance things they need to be looking out for, etc. So with all that, thank you for being here. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, it was fun. Good to
That's
see you.
fun.
We really appreciate it. Have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next week. Bye, kids.